everybody. I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Simon Sinek has said, "A great leader doesn't only inspire us to have confidence in what they can do, a great leader inspires us to have confidence in what we can do." On today's episode, we talk about leadership and the difference between good leaders and great leaders, why you need to be all in on your employees, building unstoppable teams where everyone wins using the FASO formula, and more. My guest is a husband and father, an entrepreneur behind several multi-million-dollar companies, one of the world's most popular speakers on entrepreneurial and business topics, a podcast host, and the best-selling author of several business books, including Profit First, Get Different, Clockwork, and his newest book, All In. He's a former small business columnist with the Wall Street Journal and business makeover expert for MSNBC. Please welcome the man who Simon Sinek deemed one of the top contenders for the patron saint of entrepreneurs, Mike Michalowicz. Mike, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
This is an absolute honor, Jay. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I am so excited about our conversation today, and I'm very, very excited that you have brought All In to the rest of the world for us to learn from. So this is going to be a fantastic conversation. And actually, this is your second appearance on this podcast. Yeah. The first was episode 119 back in early 2022. So for all of you that are watching and listening right now, if you want to hear a bit more about Mike's backstory, definitely check out episode 119. So, Mike, let's go ahead and jump right in. I thought a good starting point would be for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
I think it's a form of tenacity. I just stick with things when I feel they're right. I know they're right, but I don't necessarily know they're right, but I just feel it. I remember, as an author, when I was writing Profit First, which has gone on to be my most popular work, I knew Profit First was right, but the resistance and the number of people telling me it's not right, including my own publisher, who said, "No, we don't need another accounting book." And at the time, my literary agent said, "This is a go nowhere book." I'm like, but this is what's so needed. So I decided to go the self-publishing route. And then my actual publisher, who denied the book, it was Penguin Books, came back and said, "Oops, we actually want to represent that book," revised and expanded it. And the book has served so many entrepreneurs. I also respect the resistance. Like, what they said was right in the moment, but I just had this feeling there was this missing piece. And I'm proud that I stuck with it when I think a prior version of me may have just said, "Nah, just give up."
So to that point, when you were getting some of this pushback, was there anything that you decided to change about Profit First before you either self-published it or once it was published with Penguin?
Yeah, the second version is substantially revised. I didn't have much practical experience. I was writing for the Wall Street Journal at the time, and I wrote an article about Profit First and had hundreds of readers of WSJ reach out to me and say, "My gosh, this is working. I'm trying this out." I didn't have enough, I think, case studies under my belt. I had been doing it for a while. I coached other businesses through it, and I wrote the system. But what I did at the time was I thought there would be two versions of Profit First, a basic version, and then if you want to make it more advanced, a second step. After that book went out, the self-published book, and Penguin reached out to me and said, "We want this," I sat down and reevaluated it and talked to many entrepreneurs, and they said, I didn't know which path to take. I'm like, oh, it's a step one, then step two. And it was seen as a path. So I decided to consolidate the systems. It's just one Profit First system. There is no advanced version. It's just one system. And that landed much more smoothly. And And it's funny, if I could do a third version of Profit First, I suspect I would do that now too.
That's so interesting. Well, as a side note, and I love that you did this. You took Profit First, and you actually created your first children's book. What, a couple of years ago?
That's right.
And it wasn't. And Profit First really was the impetus behind that children's book. So share a little bit about that as well. And I'd be curious at this point, what type of response did you receive to that book, and what kind of questions have you been receiving, either from children or from parents?
Yeah, so I wrote that book because I heard enough times from entrepreneurs who implemented Profit First, I wish they taught this in school, and I wish too. Now, the systems exist, they just aren't in the school's curriculum, and I don't think I had the ability to get it into some school districts or whatever. And I think that maybe is an ultimate vision. It's like, my gosh, maybe I can get it prior to school. So I wrote it for preschoolers. And I'm like, what would be something that is so exciting for them that they would want to own it into school? Maybe you can start propagating that way. I also had a kind of a hidden agenda. I also realized that some people were discovering Profit First or whatever financial system for their own personal finances, but not deploying it as adults. And I said, well, maybe if they teach their kids, it'll make them do it too. So that was kind of my hidden agenda. When I wrote My Money Bunnies, that's the book, I knew it had to be about creation, because when we create something, we want to possess it. So could I have them create something? And we made a system where it's jars and you can put little bunny ears on it. And we gave each bunny a name. The sometimes bunny, like sometimes life events happen and you need to be prepared for that. The anytime bunny, anytime you have a whimsical desire, buy crayons or buy a piece of candy, as long as there's permission from the parents, there's a resource for this, and so forth. The book has gone on to be successful. I've actually done my most difficult speaking engagements at kindergarten classes now. That is not easy, I'll tell you, to keep those students engaged. And they're unabashed about saying the truth of what they like and don't like. It's really a privilege to speak to that group and to get the live dynamic feedback and the interest. And when they're not interested, they tell you that too. So that's how it's gone. It's gone about, and it's been successful. It's not to the Profit First standards, but it's given me an access to this community I wouldn't have access to. The other thing that's just interesting is I used to go on stage for speaking events with adult groups, entrepreneurs and so forth, and it's similar to the kind of things you shared about me, but there's almost this perceived ostentatiousness, or I'm better than thou because it's this Wall Street Journal guy or something. Ever since I became a children's author, when they throw in, oh, and he's a children's author, it's like, oh, okay, he's approachable, this guy. It kind of softens the CV, if you will.
That's so interesting. So two threads I want to pull on here. One, what you just said. I feel in reading and watching your content and the way that you show up, and just in our prior conversation, it seems like you work really hard to be that relatable, down-to-earth, regular guy. And let me rephrase that. I say that you work, it seems like you work really hard at doing that. It seems to me like you are that guy. That's just who you are. So I get the part that, hey, he's a Wall Street Journal guy and you've done all of this great stuff and you've written all these books. But I love the way that you show up. I think that is part of your superpower and what allows you to connect with people on such an incredible level. And that's important because when I think about teachers as an example, some teachers may know their subject matter very well, but they may not necessarily be able to connect with people and actually teach the material where it lands with me. You are able to do that. So not only do you have the experience and the knowledge, but then you also have the relatability, the humanality of all of that. And I think it just really helps the material land with those that are connected with you. So just want to acknowledge you on that point.
I appreciate it. There's a community of experts who, and this is kind of harsh, but I see them as the greater than thou kind of positioning. They have their private jet and that expensive car, and the positioning is, I'm great, you consumer are not, but you could be if you follow my script. And I just don't think that's what humanity is. I think everyone's great. Like, everyone's here on this planet, and we're all going through different journeys. Actually, how I see life is kind of like an infinity symbol, an 8, on its side. And
Yes.
we are all on the infinity symbol, just in different spots. You're here, and maybe I'm here, and we're just in different spots. So we all have something to learn from each other. My belief is I'm not better than anyone else. I just have a few things that maybe are different, and other people have something different. For me, it's invoked a lot of curiosity. It actually can frustrate some people as when I go to do a presentation or something, and they do the Q&A, I unintentionally sometimes will flip it, and the person interviewing me, I'll start asking them more questions because I'm just really curious. There's so much for me to learn. I think that it's my mission, something I discover that maybe is not discovered yet by other people is my obligation to share, just as much as I want to learn it from them. And I think that maybe brings about a relatability. But it is true. And I don't know, thanks for addressing that, does he work hard at that? I do keep myself in check. There's sometimes my big fat ego starts coming out. I'm like, what a tool. Why am I acting this way? And sometimes it comes up. So I do work hard to say, that's not who I want to be or who I am. Stay in check, man. You're just a regular guy.
So. And I don't want to forget about the other thread that I wanted to pull on. I'll get to that in a moment. But to the point that you just made, who is in your circle who would say to you, who can hold that mirror up and say, Mike, come on, man, your ego is kind of ruling the day here. Let's step back a little bit. Who is that person or people that you trust that can see that and would give you that kind of honest feedback?
And this is not planted, but I actually literally have the list of names. This is from my wallet. I don't know if you can see if the camera's clear enough, but I call it my Square Squad. And these are a list of people who I can call on. There's a guy named Matt Schaup who he tells me the honest truth. He's such a good human. Mike Maddock, who is always cheerful. AJ Harper, she is so integral in her word, and Ron and Robin Robbins, who's a widely successful entrepreneur and likes to throw punches. She doesn't hold him back at all. She enjoys throwing him. I remember once, my big ego, I had a new business I was starting, and we achieved $1 million in revenue. It was one of the thresholds, and I came to Robin and said, "Hey, we achieved $1 million." She's like, "Oh, that's cute. That's really cute." It set me back down. I'm like, oh my gosh. Kelsey, who's the president of our organization, is the queen of kindness, but she's called me out in ways that have served me in such great ways. So that's my Square Squad. And I think it's important to have them written down and carried with you, because my wife is on this list too, of course, Krista. It's because there's moments when it's like, okay, I need to speak to someone. Who should I speak to? And I want to have that list in front of me so I don't circumvent someone who's going to really tell me the truth.
I'm so glad that you shared that. That's not something that I have today. I don't have that written down. I mean, there are people that I
Sure.
trust and that I know are going to give me honest and sincere feedback, including my wife as well. But I love identifying it as a Square Squad and actually having that down in writing, and also with a note about that person and why they made that list, right? I think that's great. So I'm curious, when you do get feedback, when someone says to you, hey, Mike, your ego is getting in the way.
Yeah.
How well do you receive feedback? And have you always received feedback the way that you do today, whether that's good at receiving or not so good at receiving?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm not good, but I'm better at it. You know how I receive feedback? I realized is immediate resistance every time. That resistance window, though, is shortening. So I remember reading the book, The 5 Love Languages, and one of the love languages is words of affirmation. That's my love language. Mike, you're doing well. It literally makes me feel good. And when I hear, Mike, you're not doing well, it literally makes me feel bad right away. And I think this is how I receive information. So if someone tells me something of value yet critical, resistance wall. I remember I was at a speaking event once, and afterwards, I was autographing books, and this one person line comes up and says, "Oh, you're autographing the wrong page." And instant resistance. I'm like, "Who is this person?" and whatever. And she then went on to say, "Don't sign the blank first page. Sign the second page where the title is, because when someone takes a picture, you'll have your title there. It's great for social media." My mind wasn't ready to hear that because I heard you're signing the wrong page, and I'm like, "No, I'm not." And it took me like literally months when the thought come up, like, God, what a pain. How mean was she just to, and then finally I'm like, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe it was delivered in a wrapping or a package that I didn't think was great, but when you open the package, it's like the most beautiful gift.
Yeah.
So I've been more aware of that. When I see what I consider ugly wrapping, I get real hesitant, but I think I've been able to compress the time. I hope I'm smart enough to realize there's stuff I'm rejecting right now that I shouldn't be. But I'm just in the nature of rejecting it. I just don't know what those are, but at least I hope I'm cognizant that I am rejecting things and opening my mind to receiving those things.
See, I really respect the fact that you have that level of awareness and that you realize that I may not be where I want to be yet, but I'm willing to get better. And that you can take those moments to maybe take a step back when that resistance comes up, right? When that wall comes up, and you can take a step back for a moment to say, right, question that. Because I think too often, and I think about this in the workplace, when we receive feedback from a boss or a team member, if the feedback isn't, "Hey, you're doing a fantastic job, and here's where I think you did a great job," if the feedback is not all that positive, my first response would have been, the wall goes up. Who are you to say, right? And but I think if we can take just that moment to realize that if someone's willing to take the time to share something with us, there's something we can learn in this, and I should be paying attention to it, but I may need a little bit more time to process it.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
I've gotten a discipline, too, of acknowledging and thanking people, because there's a social consequence for honest and integral criticism, unfairly, but there is. If you say, "Hey, Mike, when you appeared on the podcast, one tip is don't dress the way you did. It's not flattering colors, or it doesn't work, or your background's too busy." That may be really valuable feedback, but you also know the consequences. You may get resistance from me. "Jay, what are you saying? Like, what makes you feel that way?" And it could cause conflict. So it's really risky for someone to give feedback that may be of value because of potential consequence. So a discipline I try to be consistent with is when someone gives me critical feedback, to give a sincere thank you and say, I want to acknowledge that that's not easy to say. I remember someone in email said something about my website, and I wrote back and said, "I want to, first of all, thank you so much, because I know how difficult it may be to give critical feedback on my website, knowing that I may ignore you, or worse, I may ban you. And the fact you shared is a big deal. Please give me your mailing address. I want to send you a gift, a thank you gift." And I sent them a collection of books, not my books, but books of another author that I admire who's with my publisher. And this person just wrote back and said, "My God, I never expected this. I just thought it was the right thing to do, but I was ready for you to come with a punch. And for you to gift me, you just won a fan." And of course, that was not my objective, but my objective was to empower that person. And maybe the next time they come to me, they feel even more empowered to say the boogers that are on my face. Tell me about those.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I think that's a beautiful gesture that you did, that I would do something very similar under the right circumstances. So the other thread, very briefly, that I wanted to pull on was going back to Money Bunnies and your comment about how challenging it was to present on stages in front of kindergartners and young people.
Oh my God, yeah, they're brutal.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So what I would love to find out from you, is there a particular question that was asked of you by a young person that surprised you or just made you stop in your tracks and kind of scratch your head a bit? Or did that not happen?
No,
I'm just curious.
Yeah, there was definitely things that were said and asked, but there was something that was told that I think is even more interesting. But I remember the ask, like it was when the book came out, it was near Valentine's Day, I think. And I'm just reading the page, and I look at the kids, I ask a question, and they go, "Who's your Valentine, Mr. Michalowicz? Mr. Mike ultimately became the name. Mr. Mike, who's your Valentine?" And just, I'm like, it was so far off of it wasn't a conversation, so far off I was talking, but I also realized in that moment, two things. What I was saying wasn't landing, so I was making a mistake here. Secondly, they were speaking what was on their mind, and this is real feedback. Like, I've never been in an audience who just jumps to something different, but I know that's human nature. I was so appreciative of just the honesty. I said, my wife's my Valentine's. They said, "What about your kids? Don't you love your kids?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do love them." "Why are we your Valentines?" I'm like, "My God, I'm an animal. I'm an animal. I should have made you my Valentines." The other thing,
I love that.
yeah, it was funny. The other thing is what they would tell me when I'd ask them questions. I said, what would you, if you had a money bunny, what would you do with your money bunny? The stories that would come out were all over the place, and they could just go. I lost control of the audience. The kindergarten teacher had to help me recover from that because it could have gone on for hours. I'm like, if you had $5 in your money bunny, and anytime money bunny, what would you do with it? And one kid's like, "I would go out and buy this." Another kid's like, "I would punch my money bunny." Ha ha ha. And like this insanity ensued. I'm like, what's going on here? They're insane. And the kindergarten teacher very quickly said, "Class, everyone raise your hand." And everyone raised their hand. There was silence again. I'm like, "What do you do?" She goes, "We know when we raise our hand, there's silence." I'm like, my gosh, she was teaching me tools to control an audience. So I thought that was kind of funny too.
Amazing. I hope you use that with your adult audience.
I use it with adults now.
Good for you.
Jay, it's the most amazing trick. If you're in front of an audience, you tell the audience and we prepare them. When I raise my hand, you raise your hand too, but you have to be silent and then stare at anyone that doesn't have their hand raised and just give them the evil eye until they raise their hand. You can silence an entire audience within seconds.
That is so good. That is so good.
Yeah.
The lessons we learn from teachers and the young, right? It's wonderful. So, Mike, you recently asked a couple questions of your community. And I'm going to put those questions to you because I'm curious how you would respond. I did not see your own personal response, which is why I'm asking the question. So the first question was, how do you show up in your life personally and professionally? And then the second question was, what are the obstacles you find that challenge you and hinder you from showing up the way you want? So could you answer those questions?
Yeah. How I show up in my life is curious and always seeking the simplest solution. That's how I see myself. I'm really curious. And so someone actually once said to me, "Jay, how does it feel like to be a creator of ideas?" And I'm like, I don't know if I created any ideas. I'm a curator of ideas. I love hearing and collecting things and then assembling them in a way perhaps that hasn't been told in that fashion before or is a new spin on something that exists. I'm the first to share. I don't have any new ideas. In fact, I think a brand new idea can be risky. I think it's better to take established long-term ideas that are working and then put it in a new modern flavor or in a way they'll serve people. So I think that's how I intend to show up.
Okay.
And I think for the most part, I generally do show up. When it comes to obstacles, I know I'm impeding myself the second when I start asserting a solution without asking a million questions around it. If someone says, I'm struggling financially, I'm like, quick fix, just implement profit first, next. When I show up that way, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm circumventing learning here. And my job is to learn. Ultimately, maybe I do have an idea or solution, but there's that saying, the master will arrive when the student's ready, something to that effect.
Yes.
Until the person comes back and seeks something that maybe I can share with them, there is no value because they're not ready to receive it anyway. Like if you tell me the right way to dress for a podcast, but I wasn't seeking that, there's inherent resistance. Why are you giving me something I don't even want? So the obstacles when I start rendering advice or giving direction where it wasn't even asked, even if it's quote unquote the right solution, even if it could be helpful, it doesn't mean it's going to be deployed. And that's a failure too. the person needs to be ready, willing, and desirous for it. And the only way to get there is through an exchange of curiosity, I think.
So I do find what you just shared very interesting about the obstacles. And it seems to me that that's putting your coaching hat on and wanting to provide advice. And I can't tell you, Mike, the number of times that I've been in a situation where someone says something, they bring up a problem, and I want to give the solution immediately. And if my wife's with me, she'll say something to me later. You don't have to, they didn't ask you for advice. That wasn't what they were asking for. They were just sharing a challenge or a problem that they're having. And so you reminded me of the importance of just pausing and stepping back and not immediately going into solution mode. That may not be the appropriate response at that time.
There's a video that circulates, and it's a little misogynistic, but it's funny because it characterizes this. It's a female and a male. The female has a nail in the center of her forehead. I don't know if you've seen this video. And she's talking to this guy, and she's like, I have this pain in my forehead. And he looks at her and goes, there's a nail in your forehead. She goes, it throbs all the time. He's like, pull out the nail. She's like, it is excruciating. And he's like, pull out the nail. And she gets so upset with him. She's like, just leave me alone. It's a funny video, but it also speaks to the human nature of all people, is until we release the symptoms and talk about it, we're not ready for the cure. And if we're not seeking it, we may be seeking it on our own. That's part of the human journey too, is finding our own path forward. So the relief of sharing also brings clarity in our own mind of what we need to do to solve something for ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. And that is a great video. I've watched that a number of times. Yeah. Oh, I definitely do. Fantastic. So I would love it if we could dive into your latest book, All In. And what a fabulous book. Now, I have not had a chance to read the entire book yet, but what I have read, it did just come out. But what I have read is just amazing, and I can't wait to continue reading the book and finishing it. And as I'm taking notes here, I'm looking at ways where I can apply this with my own coaching clients and my own business. So I really appreciate that, first and foremost. But before we really start to delve into this, a couple of things. First, you dedicate this book to Helen Fuller because that's what Dad would have wanted. So I've done a little bit of research, and you do speak to this in greater detail at the end of the book. But I would love it if you would share with all of us Helen's impact on your dad and why Helen was such a great leader.
Yeah, I make it the closing story of the book. For me, was this great realization. My father, for me, was the greatest father I could have ever had. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, he was at the age where he was ready to go. He passed away about 1.5 years ago. And I was talking to him. I was blessed to be there on his final day. And he couldn't speak anymore. He'd lost his voice. But I asked him a question, which I'd asked him once or twice before, but I never wrote down a name. I asked him, I said, who had the greatest impact on your life, Dad? Now you're in your final stages. And literally his last words, and it's tough to keep myself from crying here, he spells out Helen Fuller, Hell and En Fuller. I went on to find out who she was. She worked in the Community Service Society of New York City, where my father grew up. My father grew up in the tenements of New York, came from Ukraine, that's where my family's originally from, in the early 1900s, and my dad was born in 1928 in the tenements. Hard conditions. The crime and stuff that was going on there, people packed in rooms and stuff, was really difficult. But it was impoverished. He thought his life would be like his father's, working at a factory and all that stuff. But when he was around 13, this society, the Community Service Society, worked with impoverished kids, and he was assigned Helen Fuller. Helen Fuller, for the first time, got him into a camp, and he went away to Maine experienced his first time anywhere outside of New York City, of the industrial part of the city, and just was exposed to newness. She took him under his wing, even beyond of what the services could provide. And when my dad was getting older and considering going to college but couldn't afford it, she encouraged him to join the Army because of the GI Bill. And he served in World War II during the occupation in Japan, and used that to support going to college. When he went through college, she helped give him direction to get his first job as an engineer, and just he lived a really extraordinary life as a result. No one's known of Helen Fuller, but she never knew me or met me or know who I am, and she's passed away so long ago. But she's had this cascade effect. The other story is my father was abused as a kid severely, and I only heard scant stories. My father was zip-lipped about it, but he never abused me or my sister. And I want to attribute that to a great leader, Helen Fuller, who saw potential in someone who she didn't have to, and gave him that. And that leader not only transformed his life, he or she transformed my life. I would argue she's transformed my children's life and their next generation too. We have this cascade effect, and that's why I thought it was so important to dedicate it to her. A great leader doesn't mean a big, large organization. It can be just leading one other person in one way.
First of all, thank you for sharing that part of the story. It really is amazing, and it highlights the importance of showing up for the people that are around you and doing the right things and looking for ways to help others be successful and give others not necessarily a hand out, but a hand up, right? Show them what a path to success can look like. And I think it really is a remarkable story, and we can all learn. And you have created the opportunity for us to learn about Helen and about that impact and about what your father gave to you through your writing and through what you tell the story and All In. Yeah. Now, I want to ask you another question about your dad. So your dad lived to be 94. And what was one, clearly there were many, but what was one of the most valuable life lessons that your father taught you that you just hold within that kind of guides how you live your life today?
He unequivocally supported my first and my subsequent entrepreneurial endeavors, which made no sense because there's not an entrepreneurial bone in my father, my mother. They both were, well, my mom wasn't, but she ultimately, after she raised me and my sister, entered the corporate world. But my father was in the corporate world. That one job, engineering job he got out of college was the one he stuck with until he retired. And I remember I said, Dad, I want to start a business. And he's like, I don't understand what that means. I don't understand the risks or anything. But he's like, give it everything you've got. I believe you can do this. It was such a struggle, that business. I had no idea what I was doing. I couldn't afford to clean the office. My dad said, hey, I'll volunteer to be your office cleaning company. And my mom and dad would come in once a week and vacuum and pick up garbage and, you know, our little stupid office. He unequivocally believed in me. I think what that spawned in me is it was genuine. It wasn't blind faith. He just said, you can do this. I have an unequivocal belief in every entrepreneur. Like I can just see the extraordinary success it's already there in people. And that's why sometimes I have this like boyish enthusiasm. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm like, you've got this. I met someone that had a candy store and they're like, it's so hard. I'm like, this is amazing. You have a candy store. Like, I can't stop getting excited. And I can see the potential. And maybe it's a little bit infectious and maybe it's a little bit ignorant, to be honest. But it's genuine. And I think I'm so grateful my father gave that to me.
I think that's beautiful. So what was the primary inspiration for writing the book? And why now? Why was this the right time for this particular book and these messages?
The primary inspiration is, and I think it always is my readership. I'm very lucky to be in contact with many people who read my books and deploy it. Many entrepreneurs who haven't read my books, but just have a dialogue with them. And I am curious, what's the challenge you're facing now? Pre-COVID, there was a growing struggle to recruit and retain people, to raise the bar in an organization, and that was attributed to the millennial generation, but it's just a change in people's expectations. But then COVID happened, and what were desires now became requirements. So people wanted to work remotely. Now they expected to work remotely. People wanted flex time. Now it's required there's flex time. And so COVID became the catalyst. I researched this book for about 5 years. The first 2 or 3 years pre-COVID, I was like researching, testing. COVID hit. I said, I got to double down on this and get this work out. So that's why the book came out now.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So in the book, first of all, you provide great examples, lots of different stories, and really if I could say that the punchline, if there really is one, it is the FASO formula, which everything about the book is really tied to that formula. So share with us, if you will, what the FASO formula is, and then let's talk about each of those specific areas and maybe give an example of each that might distill or provide a lesson to those that are listening and watching right now.
Perfect. Yeah. So the FASO model addresses the 3 key elements that a business has when it comes to team building. It's the recruiting of team members, it's the retention of team members, it's the raising the bar for the organization, those team members. So how are those 3 elements? And I found there's basically 4 stages we have to go through to achieve those elements. And sometimes they work in concert. Sometimes you do something and it'll serve recruiting and retention. Other ones will help raise the bar in performance and recruiting and so forth. FASO stands for fit. And I can break down why that's so important. But basically, it's prioritizing what are the roles of the organization. What I found for many businesses, small and big, is the business starts to morph around the people. So we bring someone on board and say, wow, this person is performing great and they have talents here, so we should actually be doing this and do that. And the business starts to morph like an amoeba. It actually reduces the performance of the company, but also it hampers the people. And we also have what's called a siloing effect. We match people's talents to different titles. Oh, that's my CFO. That's my administrator or whatever. So fit is about breaking the silo of instead of matching talent to titles, we want to match talent to tasks. And we can dig into that. The next part is ability. There are 3 forms of ability that people have, but most organizations only consider 1, maybe 2, and they're the least consequential. So the first is experiential ability. What you've done in the past is an indicator of the future. It's represented on your resume. And many corporations just consider that. Many leaders will say, okay, I'm going to interview these people. And the results are pretty dismal in getting well-qualified people. The next ability is called innate ability. Innate is the hardwired talents, skills, behaviors, attitudes that you have. And there's great tools for this. Enneagram could be one, or Myers-Briggs and so forth. Few companies look at those, and then we should. But even that is not that consequential. The biggest ability that almost no company looks at, that is the most important, is called potential ability. Potential is, in the right environment, how can this person perform? How would they flourish? And there's ways that indicate people's potential, but very few companies, actually almost no companies, measure it. And I'm really trying to push this forward. There is one industry, though, that's a massive industry that does not do a single interview. They only do potential assessments, and they are crushing it. And it's the sports industry. And it can be translated into commercial business. Then there's the S, which stands for safety. As leaders, we need to set up an environment where people feel safe. There's multiple levels of this. There's the most basic stuff like physical safety. And yes, even in modern society, some people, even in professional work environments, don't feel safe. And we as a leader can resolve that. There's emotional safety, relational safety. I feel safe with my colleagues. There's financial safety. And we can address that very simply, not even through bonuses or increasing or compensation. We can do it through open books. Because when people have insights onto the health of the organization, they have predictability in their own stability. And that brings about a degree of confidence and comfort. And the last thing is ownership. Ownership There's two types of ownership. And the most common refrain I hear is, I wish my employees would act like owners. You absolutely can do it. But there's two types of ownership, and you need to know the difference. One is what's called legal ownership, where you have a contractual or financial obligation to something, and you legally own it. And there's what's called psychological ownership. And ownership only happens, the sensation of it, when we have psychological ownership, regardless if we have legal ownership. As an example, I own stock in Ford. When I drive by a Ford factory, I don't go, hey, there's my factory. I don't feel that way. I'm like, where's my money? Where's my dividends? Even though I have legal ownership, psychological ownership is where something feels like it's part of me. It's part of my identity. It's mine. That's my house. That's my car. That's my dog. Well, we can have people feel that too in their business if we deploy it.
So with what you just walked through with us, the two areas that I'd really like to hone in on, they're all important, but the two that just really connect with me, one is what you talked about when it comes to potential. And you mentioned the sports industry, right, as an example. So I'm curious there, for a small business, how can we look at someone's future potential when we're looking at recruiting and hiring? So that would be one question. And then I also want to take a look at the psychological ownership side, because this is a big one as well. So let's start with potential. What, based on your own experience and what you've written in the book, obviously we're going to link to the book because there's a lot more detail there, but I'd love for you to share an example or two of how we can look to someone's potential as we're thinking about hiring, recruiting, and retaining.
Yeah. So it's one of my favorite subjects, and it's been deployed by now many small businesses, but not nearly enough. And I'm hoping more do, and big businesses too. It's through workshops. And so first I'll give you the example from the sports industry. I actually had a personal experience with it, so I can relate to it. I played sports in high school. I wasn't a particularly good athlete, but I played lacrosse, and I was invited or encouraged to go to a camp, a sports camp. And I went with 300 other students from the area. We went to a camp in the Northeast called Hobart. It's a university. They're fabled actually for their lacrosse. And everyone was on the field practicing, and the coaches are teaching us stuff. And I noticed some of the athletes were being tapped on the shoulder saying, hey, you're doing a really good job here. We'd like to take you to another field. There's more skills we want to teach you. And what they were doing was, as they were teaching us techniques, they were also observing our potential, our spark, our thirst and desire. And when we demonstrated that, they picked the certain students and brought them to higher performing fields. They were vetting us out. At the end of a 5-day camp, I think it was 3 or 4 students were picked, invited to play at Hobart. Not one of them, but they were. And what was interesting was, after that, though, I ended up playing collegiate lacrosse. And I would argue it's in part because of the skills I learned there. A camp allows everyone to elevate, but it also differentiates the people who have the most potential that you can cherry pick. And this is how all athletics are run. They run camps. So I was like, my gosh, they don't interview and say, hey, how would you perform on the field? You demonstrate it and experience it, but you actually get better in the process. The traditional interview, if you don't get the job, you don't know why you didn't get the job, and you're out on your own. You're blind to it. Here, everyone knows what's going on. So I was like, wow, I wonder if corporations could do this. Home Depot does this, and Home Depot is one of my favorite stories. They have these workshops where you can build a birdhouse or something, and you come down with other parents and so forth, maybe kids, and you're building a birdhouse. They're doing a few things here. The obvious thing is they want you to have an experience at Home Depot that ingratiates you with the store and you buy from them. But there is a bigger, more important hidden agenda. They have an employee there who's simply observing the participation of the parents. Who's the most engaged? Who's helping other parents? Who's asking the most questions, or is showing the most ability in working through the situation? They then tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you really demonstrated great skills here. You were helping other parents. You're the type of person we want working at Home Depot. You ever consider working here? Here's an application. It's a recruiting platform. There's so many of these. Domino's Pizza, during the COVID pandemic, built an app that said, build your own pizza. And you could put the pepperoni and so forth on the pizza. And then at the end of it, you could make an order and buy the pizza you had just created. They were using it as a recruiting platform. They were watching the people that put the most time into making the perfect pizza. And people that spent more time on it, they sent out a notice saying, hey, you made an amazing pizza and you spent a lot of time on it. Want to come down to the shop and actually see what it's like to make a pizza? And they started hiring cooks this way. It's a recruiting platform. So what the goal here is, when you have a job opportunity, we're not going to run ads anymore. We're going to run an educational event. It can be online, it can be live, but invite people to go through an education experience. You need to hire a bookkeeper, teach how to become a bookkeeper. You need a high-end lawyer, teach what it is to do a very specific legal process, and have the prerequisite being you have to already know X, Y, and Z to come on board so you can get a high-level person. Charge people to show up. This is an educational event. Give them a certificate of accomplishment. But what you do during this process is they are learning. Just the fact of showing up is they are the curiosity seekers. The best part is the best performing and the most interested people in a field often are gainfully employed. They're working elsewhere. An educational event attracts all people. If you run just an ad in the newspaper or whatever, Indeed nowadays, you just get people there who happen to be looking. This way you get attract a larger swath of people, observe them. The people that show the most desire, thirst, and curiosity inevitably have the most potential. That's how you get it.
What a fantastic idea. That's brilliant. So thank you for sharing that. Let's go to on the psychological ownership side. So
Sure.
Again, give us an example of how we can build that psychological ownership so our team members truly feel that sense of ownership versus just, I work for this company.
I'll start off with an example of cars because I think everyone can relate to that and show you how it translates. Rental cars versus a car in your driveway, the one you own, the way we treat them is radically different. When I take out the Hertz rental car and get past that DMZ and show my license for the 15th time, I grind into the gas pedal. I pedal to the metal. I try to spin the wheels, and I munch on the brakes when I'm pulling up to a light. I drive the car more aggressively, and I surely don't wash it before I return it. When we don't own something, we will take advantage of it, and particularly when we're forced to comply with certain rules. So in a rental car, they'll say, fill it with gas or you get penalized significantly, $10 a gallon if you don't fill it. No scratch, no dents, clean interior. When we're forced to comply, we will seek to defy. And in traditional ownership, in traditional leadership, we tell people, here's what you need to do, and we're going to measure it, and you better do this. We're forcing compliance. People will seek to elbow their way out in other ways, and they surely won't sense ownership. Now, let's talk about the car in your driveway. I have a pickup truck, and my pickup truck, baby. I remember I drove it once recently, a couple hundred miles. I patted it on the dashboard and said, good girl. I can't believe I said that, but I did. And it's because I feel I own it. Now, here's the funny thing. I don't own it. The bank does. I'm making my payments. I got it recently. It's a bank loan through the dealer, and I make my monthly installments on it. So I don't legally own it, but I have a sense of ownership. The sense of ownership is always triggered by the same three factors. And these three factors, when you know them, you have to deploy them in your business with your team. Factor number one is that we have control over the object, meaning I decide when I drive it. I decide where I park it. I have authority and control over it. Once you have the ability to dictate its path, literally in a car's case, you have a sense of ownership. So we need to give our employees the ability to determine the outcomes that they want for the organization. What's our collective thoughts? Instead of me saying, here's what you need to do, I'll say, here's what we're trying to achieve as a corporation. What do you want to do to get there? Giving you control and authority. The second thing is we need to be able to personalize it. My car, I can put my bumper stickers on it. I can put a little dice off the rearview mirror if I want. I definitely program the radio stations to my channels. It's personalization. The more it has pieces of me, it touches of me in it, the more I have an affinity and a sense of ownership. So the second thing is give your team members the ability to personalize the work they do. We don't have an accounting system here. We have Kelsey's accounting system because she does our accounting. It's not QuickBooks, it's Kelsey's accounting, a form of personalization. We were working with a client who is a large landscaping company. And they noticed that they were going through gloves all the time because people tear through the work gloves. And it was very costly. They made one simple change. They put the name of each person, the gloves they were assigned on them. So Jim or Jane or whatever the names were, they put on the gloves. the turnover in gloves reduced by almost 20. No, I'm sorry, it's about 80%. They consumed less than 20% what they used to in the past. It saved them thousands of dollars. They're a pretty big landscaping firm. Because now it was my glove. It wasn't the company's gloves that I could just tear through. This was my glove, and we cared for it in a different way. So give people the ability to personalize, to put their own spin on it, maybe to have their name associated with it or whatever it is, their color scheme. They have to be able to personalize it. The last step is intimate knowledge. The more knowledge we have about something, the more we are connected with it. My wife is crazy about our dog. And I love our dog too, but my wife has a bigger sense of ownership in our dog, I think, because she knows everything. If the dog takes one step in one direction, she'll say, oh, Archer has to go to the bathroom. I'm like, how do you know? She's like, I just know. The more knowledge we have, the more affinity we have. I remember back in the vinyl record days, I had a scratch on my record. And every time I listened to my favorite tune by Def Leppard, when the little scratch would pop, I would know exactly what's going to happen. Then I heard that exact same song on the radio, and I'm like, they forgot the scratch. They forgot. What's wrong with them? The record was so mine. So the more knowledge we have about something, the more we feel an affinity. So that's what we need to do with our colleagues. Give them knowledge, give them control, give them the ability to personalize. I do want to give one little asterisk caveat. If you give too much, a fiefdom can happen. That's when they protect it and it's all theirs and they start to exclude you, and that can be dangerous. So there's what's called psychological ownership, and then there's the highest level, which is called collective psychological ownership. That's where multiple people are involved with an object and they feel instead of it being mine, it's ours. And that's what we want to achieve.
Okay, that is so good. Thank you for going through that. Thank you for the wonderful examples. I'm going to call Joe Elliott when we get off of this call in regards to the scratch in the Def Leppard song, so we can get that corrected. Right. By the way, what is your favorite Def Leppard song?
Well, on the album of Pyromania, it's Photograph. I think my favorite song of all time is probably Bringing on the Heartbreak. I just think it's a cool song on High and Dry. Good
song. Now, I know that you're a guitar player. Are you able to play that song? Are you able to play that song on guitar?
Oh, dude, yeah, I can pull it out right now. I'll do a little lick for you. Oh my!
All right.
Just broke. This is not. Just tell me if you recognize this one.
Okay.
It's a little bit out of tune. Okay, here we go.
Oh yeah.
It's Too Late for Love.
That. Listen to you.
That's out of tune, but there you go.
That's okay. I love it. Fantastic. All right, all of you that are watching and listening right now, you didn't know we were going to go down that path, but you just got an added bonus. I love that. So, again, for everyone that's watching and listening right now, All In is the name of the book. We barely scratched the surface. Yeah. Mike provided some great insights. There is so much more in this book, so do make sure that you go out and purchase a copy of it. It will be a game changer for you. So, Mike, as we are wrapping up our conversation here, I have two questions for you remaining. One is, what are 1 to 2 bigger questions that you're asking yourself today, things that you're contemplating, but bigger questions, 1 or 2?
Yeah. So one definitely is about AI. How will AI change the world? But particularly, how will it serve us? I always look at to be an optimist. So how is AI the biggest opportunity of our lifetime, and maybe of our species? So that's the big question I'm asking myself. The second thing is I always ask myself every quarter about my business, how can I be of greater service with less effort? Because I realize if I try to drive myself more and more, I'm diminishing my ability to be of service. So how can I have greater impact with less effort? And that's a leverage thing, and I'm always thinking about that.
Beautiful. These are questions really we should all be asking ourselves. So thank you for sharing that. And here's my final question to you. I know that you went to Virginia Tech, and Charlottesville is, about 2.5 hours away maybe from Virginia Tech.
There, yeah.
So if you were to host a Jeffersonian dinner, who would you invite, and what central topic would the participants discuss to make our world a better place?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I do in Charlottesville because that's where UVA is. That's our arch enemy of Virginia Tech. But it's an extraordinary school. Listen, if it's Jeffersonian, I would definitely invite George Washington. I think they were the greatest allies and then the greatest enemies. I feel philosophically and their beliefs about how our country would grow. I invite Alexander Hamilton. I bring in Lafayette from France. I bring in that whole revolutionary generation because I think they could offer a perspective and insight of what they intended for our country and our nation and what's happening now. I would love to be a fly on the wall.
Well, wouldn't that be something? I would love to be there at that dinner as well. That would be a great conversation to have. That would be very cool. Guys. So, Mike, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. This has really been an extraordinary conversation. I appreciate you going in various directions and really sharing so much insight from All In and also just your overall experience in working in the entrepreneurial space. So thank you so much. I'm grateful for you.
This has been a joy. I've been grateful to be on your show. Thank you.
It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I have a quick favor to ask. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That goes a long way in helping us expand our reach and also attract other amazing guests just like Mike. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you run to pick up a copy of All In, apply the lessons you learn, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.